If we're talking about Hulk Hogan in that era, then the Macho Man, where does he fit on that
Macho Man,
Mount Rushmore?
Yeah, he is definitely part of it. Probably in the number 2-3 spot overall. If Hulk's not there, it's Macho Man's game.
We're looking for Jon Robinson. It's Mike Richards from RawMikeRichards.com.
Hey, what's up, man?
Hey, John, thanks so much for joining us here. We're live on the air. We've just been looking at some of the older clips of I guess what I call the time of the territories and just how different it was back then, pre WWF, pre I guess McMahon taking everything and making sense of it nationally. And you know it had its charm, and I think it's almost. When you look at the story of wrestling itself, and of course the book, Creating the Mania, he kind of took the best elements of what he saw in the past, I'd say almost 30 years, and just magnified it and just took it and went to another universe. So in that case, is McMahon, from a business standpoint, is he a genius?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I mean, it's funny because he's got this presence about him. Like, I remember, the first time I saw him backstage, and it's like, oh my God, there's the guy that created my childhood, But yeah, I mean, he is a genius. He put together everything and brought it, on such a huge global level. And yeah, I mean, it's amazing when you think about what he's done, not only from a business perspective, but from storylines and creating characters and merchandise and movies and television and to the WWE network. I mean, he's revolutionized the industry.
John, when it first happens, there would be certain families in certain areas, not only across Canada but the United States, that pretty much have had it their own way since probably the 50s. Because in that region, they would be the family. They controlled out of the gate the wrestlers that came in, how much the wrestlers actually got. So when this comes in as an idea to be a national sport, was there some pushback from certain areas or territories that didn't want to see it go that way?
Oh, I'm sure, because he's taken their business. I think back in the day when people used to share champions, and there were people like Andre the Giant who would go from territory to territory and be a star, and everyone was kind of shared, and I was like, no, now this is all mine, and I'm taking these guys, and we're gonna go national. Yeah, so obviously there's pushback because he's driving people out of business.
Yeah, certainly, John. John, David Bastier, good talking to you. The name of the book, we're talking about Creating the Mania, an inside look of how WrestleMania comes to life. And that's just of recent year. I want to rewind to your first memories, because you've mentioned it a couple times to me in passing and also on this book, that your first memory of a WrestleMania is WrestleMania 2. Mine would be around the same time, WrestleMania 1 with, in 1985. When you look at what the first couple were like, which were amazing cards, but they were one-day cards, basically. The WWE took over for one day. It's really transformed throughout the 34 years, hasn't it?
Oh, yeah, it's amazing. I mean, I remember turning on, WrestleMania 2 and, seeing the British Bulldogs and, just blowing my mind of, how incredible these athletes are. But, yeah, I mean, it's gone from a one-day kind of mega event to a year building up to this mega event. And, obviously now it's, 6-7 hours. It's almost like going to a music festival or something. You're spending the whole day kind of celebrating wrestling. It's amazing to see the transformation and what it's become. And, if you go to WrestleMania in person, then it's almost like Super Bowl week for wrestling fans. If you go to the Super Bowl, it's not just about the Super Bowl. There's parties throughout the week, and there's different events that you can go to, and that's kind of how WrestleMania is now, where you can go to video game competitions and access and autograph signings and NXT events and Hall of Fame. It's become this incredible atmosphere where you walk down the street and everybody's wearing wrestling shirts, and people will start chanting, or you run into wrestlers, both independent wrestlers and WWE people, just walking down the street sometimes. Yeah, it's pretty incredible.
John, I think that's a great comparison. Dave and I were just talking about just the enormity of the event, and you put in Super Bowl. So when I kind of look at what happens in the U.S., if I'm looking at a Super Bowl, which is obviously a massive one-day event, you could probably argue in terms of numbers, the Daytona 500 also is a massive event. But I think you can easily throw any of the WrestleManias in that category simply by, in a one-day event, the numbers probably from those in the gate, what is sort of monetarily achieved. And when we look at specifically the latter, just money-wise, just how big is a WrestleMania for a city? Because it's my understanding that, not unlike some of these big events, cities now bid on something like this.
Yeah, it's actually a very fascinating part of the book I was able to get into. I was talking to the business people in WWE, and they were talking about how, back in the day it was almost like, oh, okay, let's go to Atlantic City, or let's go, to Detroit. And now you have, 10 to 15 cities coming in, bidding on WrestleMania, because it's an economic boom for these cities. Restaurants, hotels, they're bringing in, millions upon millions of dollars. So now cities are coming in and doing presentations, and you have the mayors coming in, and you have, representatives coming from the community talking about what they can offer WWE. I think before, when I first started, WWE was like, this is what we can offer the city. And now it's the opposite. Now the cities are coming to WWE trying to pitch them and saying, hey, this is why you should have it in Orlando or Miami. This is why, we would not only make a great WrestleMania town, but maybe a Royal Rumble town. And I think that's what you've seen it morph into, is people are bidding not only for WrestleMania, but now, Survivor Series, SummerSlam, Royal Rumble. The big four are also starting to get into these bids. WWE's just done a phenomenal job on the marketing and business end. And like I said, it's just bringing so much revenue to these cities. It's incredible.
Yeah, it certainly does, John. John, just to tell our viewers, and we're showing pictures of the actual book right now, Creating the Mania. This book, I guess, if you want to put it in a nutshell, it's basically a year in the making, and you start writing about it a day after WrestleMania 33, because it is a one-year process. Did you, over that time, I know you saw a lot of live events, you watched a lot of pay-per-views at home and so forth, but maybe take us into the numbers as far as how many wrestlers do you talk to behind the scenes, because it's almost like I sense it, and I did read the book this last week when we last text and so forth. You must have talked to at least I'm going to say conservatively 85 people in the industry in WWE itself.
Oh yeah, I think when WWE said put in a list of who you want to talk to for this book, I don't think they thought my request list was going to be, 10 pages long or whatever. I mean, I was about, I was like, I want to talk to the cameraman. I want to talk to a director. I want to talk to a guy building the stage. I want to talk to the mayor of New Orleans. I want to talk to, Daniel Bryan, the creative director. I want to talk to, basically everybody who I thought was going to be on the card. WWE laughed. They loved the way the book came out, but, the guy who's in charge of books was cracking up. He was like, yeah, this is definitely the most interviews we've ever done for one of our books. It was like every week I would be watching a show and be like, oh, okay. Now it looks like, Randy Orton, we knew he was going to be involved, but now that his match is kind of in, okay, I want to talk to Randy. Okay, now I kind of know what's happening with Sami Zayn. Let's talk to Sami. The Daniel Bryan situation, it was so fluid. When I first talked to him, it was like, oh, he's not going to be in. He didn't even know what he was going to do. He was trying to be cleared. And then, all of a sudden, a few weeks later, he got cleared, and it changed the entire card. But it was pretty interesting because, getting to talk to like the people in creative multiple times, I kind of saw the card evolve. Like they would tell me, oh, okay, we're going to do Seth Rollins versus Dean Ambrose. And I was like, okay, cool. So I'd have that in the back of my mind while I'm talking to Seth and Dean. And then it's like, okay, Dean got injured, so that match is scrapped. they were going to do Jason Jordan versus Kurt Angle. Then Jason got injured. And when you think of like the domino effect that these matches would have had on the rest of the card, because then it's like, okay, if it's Jason Jordan versus Kurt Angle, who's Ronda Rousey's partner? And how's that storyline change?
Bingo.
So it's pretty fascinating to see throughout the year what I was being told and then what ended up happening.
We're in conversation with Jon Robinson. The book is called Creating the Mania, of the many books that he has written on it. And I would say this, John, so for me, I've always just been outside probably what is called a fan of wrestling. I just had a casual knowledge of it until probably the mid-'90s, where a radio station I'm working at, they had set it up where they're playing in Hamilton at the Coliseum, and I was to be the fill-in manager for the Honky Tonk Man, and it was Billy Gunn. Now, so I'm a little naive to what goes on, but what was fascinating, there's a bunch of things. Number one, behind the scenes, it's like a circus family, I guess is the only way I could put it. They all have these conversations and relationships with each other. Some of them are newer to it than others. I sit down with a very young Chyna, and she is telling me the story in this dressing room, and this is pre any work done on her whatsoever. She's not as big, or the face changing and so on. She's almost in tears, telling me how hard it is to catch on in this world, what the crowd says to her, what little kids say to her. And at that moment, I'm swept away. We got to go out and do the intros and so on. The crowd goes crazy. But the efficiency of how they do that show, and I would say it's a show, is probably professionally maybe the most incredible thing I've ever experienced. To a second, to a T, everybody knew what they were doing. They handed me a big wad of money on the way out and pushed me out the door, and then it was over. I mean, it was that quick, that efficient, and I don't know, in my experience as someone in the entertainment broadcasting world, I don't think I've seen anything in comparison to what I see in terms of the professionalism that they have in that business.
Oh yeah, it's incredible. And actually, the television director for WWE that I talked to in the book, he mentions like, oh yeah, I've worked, as a cameraman on, for NFL, NBA, MLB. He's like, there's nothing like WWE and what they produce on a weekly basis. And yeah, you're right. A lot of it is the professionalism, and it's crazy to be behind the scenes and walking around. Some of the interviews I got to do in person, I went and met up with Roman Reigns before Raw, and as they're going over the matches, like all the other people, all the other wrestlers, superstars are in the ring going over their matches. I'm sitting there with Roman Reigns for like an hour, just talking WrestleMania and talking about Brock Lesnar and life on the road. It's cool. I got to sit in basically an empty arena with Braun Strowman. He's like, hey, come with me. And, it was like 4 hours before, his match. And we're the only two people in the entire arena, just sitting there chopping it up. It's a pretty awesome experience, and to be able to listen firsthand to these guys and to see up close, like Braun Strowman. Oh my God, monster among men. When you get next to him, it's like, oh, I can't believe how huge he is. This guy could crush my head in any second if he wanted to.
Hey, John, throughout writing it and throughout the other books, because you have an awesome Ultimate Warrior book that I definitely recommend as well, among others. Did you ever get a chance to sit near or by or in the Gorilla section? And if for anybody listening, Gorilla section is basically the mind, the brain trust of what actually happens in the event. Vince McMahon sits right in an area just outside of the curtain. They call it Gorilla because as soon as you walk through the curtains, you're on the air. Did you ever get a chance to kind of sit in where everything that kind of coordinates it, the brain of the operation, and everything about an event? Did you ever get a chance to do that?
I'd see it. I'd be close by. But yeah, no, they never let me sit in Gorilla while the event was going on. I think I had amazing access, but even there were limits.
Yeah, I was going to say, because if you were in there, that may have been the best experience ever, and that's why I wanted to see if you were actually invited, because I would actually be surprised if you told me yes.
Oh yeah, no, that would just be incredible. But no, I think, not that I would be in the way, but I would hate to do anything, even personally, that I don't want to screw anything up. where I'd get kicked out and never to return. But like, you know, I'd hate to like, you know, even drink something back there and like spill it on fence or something. I could just see it.
Yeah, I got news. That wouldn't be the first spill that happens backstage. I got a feeling. And you know, you talk about size, and you know, that same night that I had to do that thing, everything was kind of laughs and giggles, but there was one moment, and I guess they do this to rookies or neophytes like myself. Goldust comes up and kind of corners me and puts me in the corner and doesn't say anything. And all the other wrestlers are kind of watching because this massive being, and I got to tell you, that was not fun. I was sweating there because I didn't know what was going to happen. Maybe they do it to everybody, but it's just, you know, because they do crazy good, and I think that crazy exists in that sport. But in your experience with talking to all these wrestlers, is there one wrestler specifically that they say that dude is crazy? And I'm just guessing. Was the Ultimate Warrior in that category?
Oh, you know, the thing about Warrior is, like, once I got him on the phone, like, you know, it'd be like 45 minutes later during a 15-minute interview, you know, like, oh, I actually have to go. Oh, well, let me tell you this other story. Okay, well, wait, you know, like, I got stuff to do. He would just talk and talk and talk. And, yeah, like once he got on a roll, it was pretty amazing. I was like, wow, I've never talked that much in my entire life. You know, one guy that I thought was pretty funny was Bray Wyatt.
Yes.
For the NXT, I wrote a book on NXT, and he was telling me how, like, when he came up with the Bray Wyatt character, he actually went to jury duty in full costume and in gimmick. So, you know, I can't imagine like the judge asking him questions and him answering, you know.
That is awesome.
That is awesome. Hey, what's your favorite WrestleMania? Do you like? I still look back at my childhood. I know this is a very popular answer, but I still look at Steamboat Macho Man in WrestleMania 3, and WrestleMania 3 may be my favorite because of the Hulk Andre angle, and when Hulk actually, well, okay, he sort of body slammed Andre the Giant, but just the way the whole setup for that whole card and everything like that, that's probably my favorite memory. Do you have a favorite WrestleMania?
Yeah, you just stole my answer though. But yeah, WrestleMania 3, you know, like 2's the first one I watched. 3's the one that I think made me a fan for life.
Yes.
You know, 3, it just had so much about it, like, you know, the rings, the little rings they wrote in, you know, to the ring, or
That's
like,
right.
you know, getting, plus like just so many people. I've never seen a crowd that big for an event. I was just blown away. And then, yeah, Ricky the Dragon Steamboat was probably my favorite when I was a kid. So like to see him and Macho Man go out, which is probably still, you know, my favorite match of all time. You know, that there's just so many little things on that card that I've never seen before. Like, you know, King Kong Bundy splashing, he's taking out. He took out like a midget wrestler, right?
Yes.
And it was like stuff I'd never seen. I was like, what is going on? You know.
So true.
See, those the midget wrestlers freak me
even
out. The midget wrestlers, I got a thing. It kind of freaks me out, like Little Lord Beaverbrook and all those little ones.
He was part of that match.
Oh, that freaked me out.
That
freaked me out. I like to see them thrown. Sorry, I just do. I did.
And then, yeah, I didn't even mention Hogan Andre, which is just such a spectacle. You know, I think WrestleMania 3 to me has the characters. You know, like Roddy Piper. You know, you saw Brutus the Barber out there, shaven head. You know, and I talked to Piper and I asked him like what his favorite match of all time was, and he was talking about, you know, him versus Adrian Adonis. You know, so I think like even among the wrestlers themselves, they look back at that card as something monumental and iconic, and like like I said, that's the one that made me a fan for life.
Jon, I guess I've probably never asked this question of someone who's made a living, with their relationship with that particular sport, because it's funny. Like Dave will put up with it. We have a lot of there's a lot of wrestlers and people in the wrestling business that have come on our shows over the years, and it's funny. Those that aren't into wrestling, those say bosses that aren't into wrestling, they look at Dave and others that are in it and say, well, it's fake, or what are you, 12? You get these ribbings, these cutting jabs at people that are non-wrestling fans, and they just don't get it. What's your answer to that when someone comes up and said, "What are you kidding me? Wrestling? What are you 10?" What do you say to them, Jon?
Oh, it's funny. So when I first met my wife, when we went on like our second date, I was telling her how I was big into wrestling, and she was like, "Oh, this is like the most ridiculous thing ever."
No.
And I was like, "Oh, well, it's funny because back then, so I was writing for this video game magazine called GamePro, and I actually became friends with some of the wrestlers back in the day, like D'Lo Brown and The Rock, and the Nation. I used to play video games with them all the time. So they just happened to be in town. So I was like, hey, let's go meet some of my friends. So I bring her to San Jose Monday Night Raw, and The Rock's like, oh, hey, go sit with his then wife Danny. He's like, here's tickets, sit with her. And we're sitting there, and The Rock's fighting Triple H, and as a rib, Rock threw Triple H on top of my girlfriend, who's now my wife, like in the crowd.
That is pretty fun. And what true story, Jon. I'm pretty good friends with Christian of Christian and Edge fame, and we brought up your name, and Christian said, and I'm not joking, you are phenomenal at video games, and the guys loved playing video games with you. He totally remembers Johnny Ballgame, as you were kind of nicknamed, and Christian is pretty good at video games too, especially a certain one.
Oh man, Christian is amazing at Top Spin or whatever this tennis game is. Like he was ranked, I think at one time, like online in the world, he was ranked, top 10, top 20, I forget. But like he's an elite video game player. But I love Christian. He's a great guy, and he's another one that I'd bring games back with D'Lo, and Christian would come by and we'd play. A lot of the guys, I think they're there so early. They go to catering, and then they have like a few hours to kill. So if I came back with a PlayStation and Madden or NHL, something to play, we'd all sit around and chop it up and play some games. And, it's pretty funny because I actually work for a video game company called Koei Tecmo, like they make Tecmo Bowl back in the day.
Oh, fantastic game. Yep.
Yes. So I do PR for them. And, we make a game called Dead or Alive. And at E3 this year, someone from WWE walked in our booth and was like, oh, is it cool if New Day comes in? And I was like, yeah, of course. Like, I know Kofi for a long time. And Kofi came in, and he didn't know I worked there because he just knew me from, like, interviewing him for books and interviewing him when I used to work at ESPN. And he came in and was like, oh, man, like, what's up? And then, the New Day came in, played Dead or Alive for a while, did a video for Up, Up, Down, Down.
Yeah.
It's just funny to see like the worlds colliding of wrestling and video games, and how it's been for me, throughout my career to just continue to see it even now, hooking up Xavier and Kofi and Eve playing video games.
Isn't it funny you mentioned that? Kofi Kingston was on our show, and he was awesome. Like, he was an awesome guy. I think that's still online. If you go to YouTube, you can still find it.
Yeah, really good dude.
Yeah.
We had him in studio for about a half an hour, and that guy could almost do anything. And athletically, he's in a good spot right now. But even when he was solo, and I think you'll agree with it, Jon, maybe one of the most athletic guys that could probably do anything if you asked him to do it.
Oh man, yeah, he's been one of my favorites for years in WWE. And before New Day, I was always like, man, like knowing him and knowing his personality, it was always baffling to me, like how he didn't get a bigger push or how he didn't get more mic time. Because I mean, he's such a great guy and such a great speaker, and it comes across, I think, on television, and obviously with New Day now, I think everybody sees it. But he's just got like that it factor about him.
Yes.
Both athletically and personality wise. So it's phenomenal to see New Day just continue to blow up. I mean, all three of them are great guys, and I think like the magic they have there, and Xavier actually talks about it in my book, is that they try to crack each other up, and then if they crack each other up, then they use it on TV. But like if someone says a joke and they don't laugh, then they don't use it on TV. So like they're almost like their own judges for creative, and they're given a lot of leeway. And I think they took the ball and they ran with it. But yeah, I mean, when Kofi was doing the thing back in the day with Randy Orton, and with the NASCAR, and dropped the paint on him, and he did he jumped from the crowd through the table. I thought Kofi was going through the roof. I thought, man, this guy is going to be a champion. And I'm not, for whatever reason, there were speed bumps along the way, but it's great that he's back up on top of card now.
Jon, thanks so much for joining us this morning, man. It's just been a pleasure talking with you. The book is fascinating. The book is called Creating the Mania. I'm sure if you're a wrestling fan, this is going to be a must-have book. Just so enjoyable talking to you, and a lot of fun, just sort of reminiscing about the sport itself and the characters that make it, and the culmination of all those things making the literally billions of dollars that it does. So it was fascinating this morning. Jon, thanks so much for joining us. I appreciate it.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
That is Jon Robinson once again joining us here. The book is called Creating the Mania, and if you're a wrestling fan, boy, I got to think that how could you not want to have this book?
Yeah, absolutely. ECW Press, and it is out in all good bookstores. It was released on the 7th of August, so we were lucky enough to get them this morning in San Francisco.
What? Did we just become best friends?
Yep.